Introduction. The poem London is written by William Blake in 1794. William Blake was an English poet who focused on the issues of society.
I wander through each charted street, near where the charted Thames does flow, and mark in every face I meet, marks of weakness, marks of woe. In every cry of every man, in every infant's cry of fear, in every voice, in every band, the mind-forged manacles I hear. How the chimney sweepers cry, every blackening church appalls, and the hapless soldier's sigh runs in blood down palace walls. But most from midnight streets I hear how the youthful harlot's curse blasts the newborn infant's tear, and blights with plagues the marriage hearse.
Okay, so I'm gonna start it all off by reading out loud the first stanza, which is, I wander through each charted street, near where the charted Thames does flow, and mark in every face I meet, marks of weakness, marks of woe. When this poem was written, Britain was under the industrialization, which means that especially London changed from being small countryside-like town to all of a sudden becoming a big city with factories and chimney with dirty smokes and lots of apartments. And this poem is commenting on that change. It is Blake's belief that human is under the control of the new machines and the new way that society has changed, and we control nature as well. And the next two lines, which is, and mark in every face I meet, marks of weakness, marks of woe, you can see that he's walking down these streets by the Thames, and he's witnessing all these people with, you can say, marks. Maybe they have marks in the face that shows how hard they work, how dangerously the work they do is. Or otherwise you can just, like, he's reading into the faces and he can see how the world is horrible and how people are filled with despair.
In the second stanza, the listener of the poem experiences sentences with more than one meaning. The first line says, in every cry of every man. The listener might understand that Blake hears men screaming while he is walking around in London. Furthermore, it can be understood as if Blake just thinks of those men screaming in frustration. In the second line, in every infant's cry of fear, Blake mentions the children. The word infants means children. Either Blake means that those kids are screaming in fear, or he explains how he imagines those children shouting because of fear. To discuss the last two sentences of the stanza, in every voice, in every band, the mind-forged manacles I hear. The word band means rule or regulation. Forged means created, and manacles means chains. Blake wants to convey how people in London are forced to have a specific understanding of the world. Individuals aren't capable of independent thoughts, but instead they are stuck in a mechanical society.
Now we're going to take a look at the third stanza, and I'm going to start by reading it out loud. How the chimney sweepers cry, every blackening church appalls, and the hapless soldier's sigh runs in blood down palace walls. Yes, and if you're going to start by taking a look at the first line, it says the chimney sweepers cry. And the chimney sweepers back then, it was these young small boys who had no parents and was not owned by the church, but the church was responsible for them, and it was the church who rented them out as these chimney sweepers, which was a very unhealthy and dangerous job for a boy. But the boys were so small that they could get down the chimneys, which was why they were used for it. And it happened a lot that these boys got stuck or even fell down the chimneys and died. So it was a very dangerous profession, and these boys didn't have long lives because all the dirty air, the bad air in the chimneys got in their lungs. And if they didn't fall down and got stuck, they died of different lung diseases and so on. Yeah, and it says that the chimney sweepers cry. And we think that it might mean that these young boys in their dirty black clothing might have an expression or looks like a big cry for help because they're so miserable and they have nothing. If we take a look at the second stanza, we see that it says, "Every blackening church appalls," and the word blackening can have two meanings in this sentence. It could mean that the walls of the church were actually blackening. They were getting black and dirty of sod from the smoke from the chimneys and the factories outside the city from the industrialism. But it could also mean that the religion and the principles of the church has been polluted because they don't follow the same morals and principles as they used to, and we discussed that the morals of the church has been polluted because the way the church treats these young boys, the chimney sweepers, as I mentioned before, it's inhuman and it's very much against the principles and the religion of the church. The third line says that the hapless soldiers sigh, and hapless means doomed, but the soldiers doesn't sigh because they're doomed. They sigh because the government back then used the soldiers to intimidate and threaten and scare the people of their own country, to scare the people of London, for example. And so you can say that the soldiers doesn't sigh from their own misery. It's not like they have to die. They sigh because they have to kill, threaten and intimidate people from their own country, people who could be maybe their neighbors or an old friend. So that's why they sigh, not because they themselves are doomed, but because they have to kill people from their own country. Line 4 says that runs in blood down palace walls. And this doesn't mean that there's running blood down the walls of the palace. It means that the people inside the palace, the government, has blood on their hands, and that is their fault that these innocent people of Britain dies. And the government sends out these soldiers, the soldiers that sigh from the line above. They send them out into war, but not a regular war. It's a civil war, but not against people, against revolutionary thoughts. And that's why the soldiers sigh. It's because they're miserable that they have to kill innocent people only because the government sends them out to do so. The soldiers has been reduced to this instrument, this tool of the government to get power and to intimidate and threaten and scare the entire country, so that these revolutionary thoughts doesn't spread out.
So I want to start out by reading the fourth stanza out loud. But most through midnight streets I hear how the youthful harlot's curse blasts the newborn infant's tear and blights with plagues the marriage hers. The newborns are the children of these harlots, or the prostitutes, and growing up in such a tough environment can be hard. So when it says how the youthful harlot's curse, it's these prostitutes that yell and swear a lot, which enlarges the cries of these infants. And when it says, and blights with plagues the marriage hers, it's the husbands who comes home to their wives plagued with these sexual diseases from the prostitutes that they got. And these sexual diseases puts both the man and his wife in these marriage hearses or funeral carriages.
At last we're going to talk about why this poem is typical Blake, and the poem is very typical and classical Blake because he was very critical of society, which the poem is as well, and he was very critical and very much against the industrialism in Britain. He meant that it would do more harm than good and that it should be stopped immediately. The poem gives us the same expressions as his opinion, so we can say that it's very typical of Blake. Blake talked a lot about religion as well, which we also see in this poem. And of course, there is the fact that Blake lived in New York during the industrialism, which makes it very, very relevant for him and also gives him a strong opinion on it. The way Blake rhymes in the poem is also very classic Blake. It has an alternate lines rhyming, and which means that the first line rhymes with the third line and the second line rhymes with the fourth line. And he uses the rhymes and rhythm to emphasize the prevalence of the horrors that he speaks of, which also is very typical Blake.